Well, hey there, and welcome to the Impactus Young Man's podcast, where we hope to help young men become, grow, and live as disciples of Jesus and navigate what it means to be a Christian man in today's cultural moment. You know, it's interesting. In many of my conversations with my guy friends, we often share the same experience. We can all remember the first time that we were exposed to pornography. And I say exposed because for many of us, we were just young kids or teens and weren't ready or even looking for it. For some, it was like finding that random shelf at the back of your local convenience store, or finding their uncle's stash of magazines in the shed, or an older family friend that introduced you to the dark corners of Google for the first time. Or like our guest today, who found it on the computer at their Christian school at only 11 years old. Now that may shock you, but it shouldn't. Studies say that the average age of exposure to pornography is between 11 and 13. Today, 30% of all web traffic is seeking, sending, or interacting with porn. And now that we have unlimited access to the internet right in our pockets, porn has never been more affordable, accessible, and anonymous. But what's the big problem? Isn't it just conservative Christians that have an issue with porn? Well, not any longer. Recently, I don't know if you've heard about this, but Visa and MasterCard actually cut ties with the advertising arm of Pornhub. Instagram removed their account that had 13.1 million followers. Even celebrities like Billie Eilish and Orlando Bloom and Terry Crews have all been raising alarms about how porn has negatively impacted them. What's going on? Why? Perhaps people are catching on to the toxicity of porn and its impact on society, marriages, and mental health. Think about the men and women who've become victims of human trafficking, or how it fetishizes illegal sexual behavior, and the scores of young men, unfortunately, that have become addicted. See, behind the screens of many phones and computers are guys that follow Jesus, but also feel handcuffed by the addiction to pornography. I've met so many guys who are courageous enough to admit that despite loving Jesus, they feel helpless to their vice, or should I say, device. And let's be honest, for years, Christian communities haven't always done a good job at talking about this. On one side, we've refused to ever talk about it, and when we have, maybe the conversation has always been about how sex is bad and dangerous. And maybe on the other side is the temptation to just say that porn use is unavoidable and just a byproduct of the culture we live in. We just have to learn to live in this new reality. And I don't know about you, but I don't feel comfortable in either of those extremes. Can there be a space for healthy dialogue around sex while also acknowledging the harms of porn use? I think so. Is there any hope for the porn-addicted man? Well, you bet. And on today's podcast, we have a guest who's helping men get free of their porn addiction forever. Sathiya Sam is a world-renowned coach, international speaker, and author who specializes in helping men overcome porn addiction. His signature program, Deep Clean, has helped athletes, doctors, pastors, executives, and entrepreneurs experience long-term freedom by resolving the root issues of sexual misbehavior. In our conversation today, we discuss the cultural moments surrounding porn, common obstacles to getting clean, and some key practices if you'd like to grow in this area. Let's jump right in. Well, Sathiya, man, so good to have you with us. You are such a friend of Impactus, and you've worked with us many times on different projects and content. And so, man, just thank you for jumping on the Young Man's podcast today.
Oh, it's always a pleasure, man. Thanks for having me here.
Now, Sathiya, you are actually a Canadian, which I want to celebrate. You're in Toronto right now. Is that correct?
That's correct. St. Catharines, Ontario.
I love it, man. A lot of times content in regards to like what we're talking about today in regards to porn recovery comes out of the States. And so I just love something new and fresh happening coming out of Canada. So I love that. Sathiya, you are a porn recovery coach. You are a content writer. You are pretty busy on social. What made you get into recovery from porn addiction?
Yeah, I mean, like most people in this space, Jordan, it started with an experience. I got exposed to pornography in the computer lab of my Christian school when I was 11 years old. And that was sort of the beginning of a 15-year-long addiction. We could get into the weeds of that if you'd like. But for me, the real issue, I mean, obviously the addiction itself was the problem, but what really infuriated me when I was addicted is that there were very few resources. And we were talking about this off camera, but like there's also just not a lot of conversations that you could plug into to figure out how to get some help on such a private, taboo subject. So that was the thing that was always burning in my heart. I knew that if I got free, as great as that would be for my life and the people that know me personally, I also kind of carry this bigger vision in my heart that I could use my own journey and help other people get free as well. And that was a little bit wishful at the time. Like every addict can say that, but by God's grace, I did actually find some things that really made a difference for me. And once I did actually reach that place of freedom, February 2016 was my last relapse. Then it was like, okay, well, I owe it to the world now because God's done something really cool here, and I don't want to keep this to myself. So that's how everything sort of spawned. We launched Deep Clean 2018, December, I think. So we've been going strong for about 3 full years, and yeah, there's no turning back, man. It's been amazing to see the response and to see the need for this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I love that. The one thing that I love about that is that well, I don't love, but it's interesting, is the fact that you actually discovered porn at your computer at your Christian school.
Yeah.
And in my previous job, I was a youth pastor, and I remember chatting with a parent, and they said, Jordan, my student, he's a teenager and he has his phone, unlimited access at night in his bedroom. But I'm trusting he's not looking at porn. And this sobering moment, I looked her in the eyes and I said, if your son has a cell phone and he has unrestricted access to it at night or any time for that matter, your son has seen porn and is likely watching porn. And it's just, I think it's important for us as a Christian podcast to just talk about, like, right now, the average age is like, the numbers are changing all the time. But from what I saw, it's like typically in the 11 to 13-year-olds right now are being exposed to porn for the first time. Yeah. I remember my first time, it was actually, my friend found a floppy disk. Do you remember floppy disk?
Yeah, that's a throwback, but yes, I do remember that.
For the real young listeners, they're like, what are you talking about? But I found this floppy disk and we just like threw it in this computer in my friend's basement. And we were like, what's going on here? And that was the beginning for my friends and my groups, as to kind of being exposed to this. And so I say all that to say, from your experience, Sathiya, does it matter if you're growing up in a Christian home or if you're in a Christian school? Like right now, how accessible is porn to especially teenagers and men in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think people have wisely or correctly identified that this generation deals with this issue in a very different way. It's a lot harder in this day and age. The main reason is it's not the age of exposure that's changing dramatically. Like the general range on any study is always between 9 and 13 years old. And it was like that back in 2000, and it was probably like that earlier as well. What's different is the volume.
Yeah.
So porn is the 3 A's. It's affordable, it's accessible, and it's anonymous. And the affordability, as in you can get anything you want for free, that's different than even when you and I watch. Like you had to really go down some sinister paths, like the sketchy floppy disk or the CD room in the video store to actually get access. That's not true anymore. And then the accessibility obviously has changed dramatically with smartphones. So the issue is not just the exposure. The issue now that people face is the volume of exposure they are getting at their fingertips. And so the effect that has downstream in the way people's brains are being rewired, obviously from a spiritual standpoint, those adolescent years are so formative. All these things start to matter tremendously. And sometimes you don't see the downstream effect until later on in life. To answer the question about, does it matter if you're a Christian or not? No, like the stats are pretty telling that Christians struggle just as much, maybe sometimes even more. And for somebody to get clean of this stuff, my personal philosophy is you have to get to the roots of the issue. You have to tackle what's really causing all of this. And it's interesting because somebody without faith sometimes is at an advantage because they don't have all the moral pressures. They don't have the different layers of shame that sometimes come when you feel like a hypocrite or you feel like, I'm a Christian, I shouldn't be struggling with this. Sometimes they're actually at an advantage. Now, granted, there's disadvantages from not knowing the word of God, not having that relationship with Jesus as well. So just to be clear and be comprehensive. But yeah, generally speaking, being a Christian and surrendering your life to Jesus doesn't give you a leg up in this journey by default. There's a working out of your salvation that actually eventually leads to, the advantages in this area.
Yeah, it's interesting. I never thought about it that way, in the sense that in the Christian community, if there's not a safe space to share like addiction, or that, I was just chatting with a friend on the way here to record this, and I asked him like if he ever talked to his parents about, watching porn as a teen. He's like, are you kidding? No way. But today, maybe if in families that maybe are more, they talk about sex often, or they're not naive to the fact that their children are watching this, they might actually have more opportunity to share that with their parents. And maybe that like suppression of shame and secrecy doesn't get so pressed down. So it's an interesting thought you say that. Sathiya, I'm thinking of right now is an interesting time for you to be in the industry of porn addiction coaching and recovery, because there's some unique things happening in culture. for years it seemed as though the church was the only place that was really talking about, the harms of porn and why it's not good, right? And basically because of the ethic and the morals of Scripture. But
Yeah.
right now, there's a lot happening even in the secular world in regards to the conversation around porn. You see Pornhub kind of losing funding and payment partners like Visa and MasterCard. You're
Yep.
seeing celebrities come out and say, we've got to do something about porn. You're seeing ex-porn stars now say that, okay, this is a problem. And so I'm just curious, how do you interpret all this while at the same time you're seeing a lot of talk about like safe sex work and sex positivity and subscription-based porn becoming popular, or what I like to call just like pocket porn? For you as a guy in this, it's a really interesting time. You're seeing kind of culture cannibalize its own. And at the same time, you're seeing kind of a new movement of sexuality happen. What's your thoughts on all that?
It's pretty fascinating. I think it's a very observant question of you, because when I started in 2018, like you said, the conversation was mostly confined to Christian circles, and then maybe some of those people who really were out there and wanted to have edgy conversations. And one of the faults of our society is we follow research probably a little bit too closely. Like, unless there's research, we don't really believe it. And it's just taken research a lot of time to catch up, but now, like you said, you have people like Jordan Peterson and Lewis Howes, and there's some people not maybe super well known, but like a Nikki Glaser or Terry Crews, Billie Eilish. These guys are all speaking out about how porn has like really harmed their life. And I am pleasantly surprised. I just have a huge smile on my face about it, because these are the kinds of things that are going to be required for the narrative to change at a larger level within our culture and our society. So it's quite interesting. I think there's still, like you said, there's still some polarizing opinions. Like, there are other people who are like, no, porn is great. It can enhance sex life. Why go through all the hassle of the relationships when you can have pornography? Like, there's academic, intelligent people who have these arguments. There's reasons for it, but me and a lot of my colleagues would probably argue that this is probably more like cigarettes, where like, it started out awesome and it was like a social status thing and everyone was doing it, and then like, oh, sure enough, nicotine causes lung cancer. We had no idea. Not nicotine, sorry, but you know what I mean, the active ingredients. They're like these are bad for you. This is going to be a problem. And I think we're just a little bit behind, but I do personally think that's where it's going. That's always been my prayer, but I'm a lot more hopeful because we're seeing this become a lot more mainstream.
Yeah, and I mean, unfortunately, typically big lessons like this come at the cost of a generation struggling significantly. And you think about all the people that died of lung cancer, right? And then they're like, yeah, maybe we shouldn't promote smoking as a healthy thing to do. And so now we have all these disclaimers on the boxes, or whatever the case may be. Your kids are in school saying, probably not wise to smoke. So unfortunately, I'm seeing a generation right now with porn in their pocket, and I'm saddened that it'll probably take their generation in some ways. Hopefully not, and I'm hopeful that maybe we can kind of shut some of these things down. But hopefully, by the time in a couple of years, the narrative will kind of be, like you said, mainstream, to say maybe we got to put some restraints on this.
Big time. Yeah. And I like what you said about like Instagram, or sorry, not Instagram in particular, but a bunch of companies have pulled their funding or their support of companies like Pornhub. And those kinds of things are really good indicators that we are actually going in the right direction and people are taking this stuff seriously. And I think the reality is, even to go back to tobacco and cigarettes and all that stuff, like, funding was a huge part of that, right? Because they made so much money selling cigarettes, and the promoting it as a social thing, like, that gets people on board. But once people start to pull the funding because they realize this is really bad for you, like, that eventually awakens society. And I think we're on the cusp of a similar pattern. My personal prediction is probably about 3 to 5 years. I think 2025 onwards is where you'll really start to see this narrative ramp up beyond Christian circles and more mainstream stuff.
Yeah, I'm hopeful, maybe even before then, but that would be great if it's 2025. I'm curious, Sathiya, if you hear this conversation at all by guys saying like, I'm not addicted, or how do I know if I'm addicted? Because from my experience in chatting with young men, especially ones that aren't, following Jesus, they say, well, I'm not addicted. I'm like, well, have you ever tried to stop? And they're like, no, I haven't really, I have no reason to try and stop. But as soon as they do, like, the month of November is often a month that, like, maybe some guys say, I'm not going to watch porn for a month. And they quickly discover how hard it actually is. And in some communities, it's just like a way to just show your self-discipline or whatever. But very quickly, as soon as a man tries to stop, it's evident that maybe I have an addiction here. Is that a key indicator to addiction? What are some others maybe that are like, oh man, maybe I have a problem with this?
Yeah, I mean that's definitely the most obvious one is like if you can't go prolonged periods and I mean I told myself I could stop whenever I want, like yeah, I enjoy it, but I'm not addicted. And it wasn't until I started to get a little bit of sobriety that I realized just how problemed I was. Some of the other indicators are if you are performing poorly in other facets of your life. So sometimes that's just sexually. That's actually becoming a big one for young guys, a lot more erectile dysfunction and that sort of thing. But sometimes it's just low performance at work or that kind of thing. Failing to make commitments, social commitments, work commitments. The number of clients we have who have got fired because they watch porn on a work computer is through the roof. And again, just like once you start to engage in riskier behavior to get the hit, to get the fix, whatever, those are all pretty telltale signs that this is much more than just something you're doing casually.
Yeah, I just think as a society, we've got to like put up a big red flag that no one starts out wanting to kind of cheat in their marriage or to get fired from their job. No one wants to do something they regret. And
Yeah.
for many of these people, it started with just an addiction to porn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's crazy. All addiction leads to death.
Mm.
Substance addiction leads to actual physical death, but behavioral addiction usually leads to death of the soul, which is much more serious. But because it's not as external as, having a drug addiction where like you can see the physical body wearing away, sometimes it slips under the radar, but your soul will die. Your relationships will suffer. The calling God has on your life will never reach its potential. Like
Man.
everything starts to be affected as this stuff lingers. And for guys that are in relationships, this is a really hard thing for them to see. But the truth is, if you're in a relationship and this is in your life, there's only two ways this ends. Either you confess or you get caught. And
Yeah,
most people that we see get caught, and that just causes all kinds of havoc in their lives as well.
totally. Yeah, that's a good summary. And it's interesting because, a lot of times speaking to Christian guys, they are probably already fast forward through this because they know the fact that porn sucks for their health, their spiritual health, their relational health, and they just know it's not working. Where the rubber meets the road and where a lot of guys struggle is like, okay, I know it's bad. I already feel that it's harming everything.
Yeah.
Sathiya, how do you turn the tide? And like, I'm sure you don't have to sell guys in your program that porn is harming them,
Yeah.
but how do you begin the discussion to recovery? And maybe what are some of the tried and true tactics that guys try that maybe have left them feeling short?
Yeah, that's got to be the hardest part about this is most people who are listening that would even be thinking that question have probably already tried something at least once.
Yeah, that's
And
good.
the difficult thing is when you've tried something once and it doesn't work and you look around and you're like, well, this is what everybody told me to do. This seemed to work for so and so. And we conclude there must be something wrong with me. My situation must be worse. And we ultimately fuel our hopelessness. The reality is for most people to make a recovery from something as addictive as pornography, it's going to take a few tries.
Yeah.
And part of that is because you don't actually understand what's causing it. And part of it is because it's a very, very complicated and deep rooted issue. What actually helps people to be a bit more direct is you have to get to the roots of the problem.
Yeah.
So when I was first embarking on freedom, I installed the internet filters. I got the accountability partners. I talked to my pastor. I was reading my Bible regularly. There was no shortage of doing those things that were, I would say, relatively mainstream. I am not against any of them, just to be super clear. I think they're all great. But if porn addiction or sexual misbehavior was a weed in your garden, most of those solutions are the equivalent of running over that weed with a lawnmower.
Hmm.
And what it means is you have some temporary relief. You can have the illusion of like, okay, this isn't in my life because the filter has stopped me from going there, or I have the partner who's going to pray for me now that I've had a relapse or whatever. But the reality is there's deeper underlying issues that are
Yeah.
driving you to watch pornography. And until you actually tackle those roots, it's only a matter of time before the weed grows back. And so the clients we work with in particular are people who are a little bit tired of, they've exhausted the internet filters, the accountability partners, they've tried the quick seminar, and they know they need something a bit more intensive, a bit more comprehensive to get to the root issues so that they don't have to deal with this anymore. And they can maybe just go after this for 4 6 months a little bit more intently and then, have the rest of their lives changed.
Yeah, I think I'm so glad you mentioned that because one thing I learned as a young adult as I was kind of wrestling through this is like I was putting the dependence of my sobriety or my, doing well in other people's hands, whether that be like a program on my computer, or whether that be like, a friend that's supposed to check up on me. And the truth is, those things fail. People fail. And so what happened was, I found like, if I were to, say, well, you didn't check up on me, or whatever the case may be, and I didn't own it when I was kind of wrestling with some of this stuff. And one thing that made me think is just the power of actually lying in these instances, especially in accountability partners, because, once you actually just tell a lie and you report that, hey, I did good this week, when you didn't, it's like, well, you're done, you're cooked. But because in that moment, you realize, I can actually lie about this, not feel the shame of confession, and just continue on in what I want to continue doing. And from my experience as a youth pastor, as soon as a teenager or a young adult just lies in that accountability, there may as well be no accountability. And they end up in deeper shame and deeper secrecy. And then in like 2 years, you find out they're just struggling just as bad as they ever have been. Yeah. And so I love that you deal with the deeper things. There's a quote, you said this in your book. You said, a man is only as strong as his ability to face his pain. What role does facing your pain have to do in kind of uncovering? Is that one of the roots you're referring to?
Yeah. It would be part of the identifying the roots and healing from them. The roots are generally pretty unique to the individual. There's some common categories they fall into, but the reality is, porn is either from a neurobiological perspective, porn is either a relaxant or a stimulant. And what I mean by that is, it's either a stimulant that gives us some kind of excitement in life because we feel depressed, we have nothing else to look forward to, or it's a relaxant. It's the thing that allows us to take the edge off, to get some sort of relief because life is so busy and so stressful. So either way, those are both basically scenarios where somebody is confronted with discomfort. It's either the discomfort of nothing in life thrills me and I'm depressed and I'm sad, or it's the discomfort of my life is so busy and I don't know how to cope with it. But either way, there are pain points driving these decisions to watch pornography. And the reason that people settle for a quick fix, I'm just going to read this book and I should be good to go, or slap on an internet filter or whatever. The reason we settle for that is because it's so much more convenient than having to deal with our pain, Jordan, right? Like nobody actually wants to confront their pain. But the reason that quote is in the book is because it's actually the only way out. The only way out of any addiction, any kind of hopeless situation in your life. You have to confront the pain and you have to confront it head on. And human nature is we tend to look for other options, the easiest way out first. And usually like I said, it takes a couple tries or a couple moments of realization until it's like, okay, fine, I will confront my pain. I'll do the hard work, whatever it is.
Yeah, I think about a friend that I have, and we were friends for 8 years. And this friend was kind of closed off, and just kind of everything was always fine. Everything was always fine. And then one night at like 1 a.m., I get a phone call. And I said, hello. And they're like, hey, Jordan, do you have a moment? I'm like, I guess, what's going on? He's like, I'm addicted to porn. And he just made himself say it out loud. And I'll just tell you, man, Sathiya, that was the beginning of, now he's been sober from a porn addiction since he was like grade 8 or 9.
Wow.
Just saying it out loud was like, oh my goodness. Now, of course, there's things that he's had to put in place since then. But for him, until he was able to just kind of deal with that short-term embarrassment and shame in a safe environment where he knew that like I wasn't going to shame him and destroy him, was like the key that unlocked like, hey, I can do this. I can do this. What part of confession, like you mentioned, just like dealing with some of those like pain points, confessing it, is that the first step you would say is like, guys, man, just confess that you've got an issue?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, it's the book of James that says, confess your sins that you may be healed. And it actually specifically says, confess your sins to one another. Yeah. And so I think that element is super, super important. The danger, or the thing that we have to guard against, is that we're not doing confession from a place of convenience, but from a place of conviction. And so my hesitation to say, yeah, just confess and you're good to go, is that we feel like all we have to do is blurt it out loud to somebody and then we're good. But it's really the deeper work that the Holy Spirit does in our hearts. It's from that place of conviction and that longing to change. That's where confession is really powerful. But I would say, I mean, the reality is, I don't think anybody's gotten free without confessing it first, whether it's just to God done privately, or it is with friends and pastors, or with a coach or therapist or whatever. There's no recovery without some degree of confession.
I love that. And I'm going to pick your brain on something that I've heard different thoughts on, and I'd love to hear what you have to say. And that is the idea of the need to confess. Let's just say for the guys that are married or in, good, like long-term relationships with, they're engaged or they see it trending towards marriage.
Yeah.
And the temptation sometimes to encourage guys to confess to their spouse, right? Which I believe in is always good if you're living a life of secrecy. But is there ever an appropriate time for a wife to become your accountability partner or like support in that way? Any thoughts on that? Because I know just would like to hear what you have to say about that.
Yeah, my personal opinion is no. I think it's a really bad idea. The main reason is because your wife cannot actually give you the level of accountability that you need if this
Yeah.
is a legitimate problem in your life. Um, Accountability partners should be people who have experienced sobriety in this area. Ideally, they've actually had a struggle with it so they can relate to it a bit and ask you the right questions. But it's that element, and then ideally, they're. I mean, we're talking to men, right? So ideally, it's a guy, because you need the purpose of the accountability system is it's twofold. The first is transparency, and you will heal to the degree that you're transparent. When your wife is your accountability partner, there's a cutoff to what you can actually share.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter how great or gracious she is, which I know lots of people are fortunate to have a wife who's supportive and willing to be that person. But yeah, the other element of accountability is, and this is where your wife could play a role as maybe a secondary accountability partner, is I believe it's right in the word. Being accountable is about giving an account for your ability. And I
Yeah.
think too many people are focused on like, yeah, man, I sinned again, or I watched again, or whatever. Good
Yeah.
accountability partners are like calling out the golden people. They're
Yeah.
seeing their value and they're calling them up to that. So again, your wife could play a role in that secondary element, but the first element of just being transparent, you want somebody where there's no limitations, there's no restrictions. And the other thing I'll just say real quick, Jordan, is they're starting to do more research on how this actually impacts a spouse when they find out that their partner has been watching pornography and been addicted. It's not good.
Yeah.
Even the wives that are really gracious and understanding about it, it's subconsciously it starts to impact their ability to trust. It starts to plant doubt, and it may not manifest right away. That's what guys are always looking for. They're worried that everything's going to fall apart, and
Yeah.
that is rarely the case. Typically, what happens is it gradually starts to deteriorate. And you're basically re-traumatizing your spouse every time they get that email or that report without context or a conversation or any of that kind of stuff. And so for those reasons, I would say, yeah, keep your spouse out of that primary role. They can be in something maybe more secondary, but find somebody else to be in the primary role.
Yeah, and my experience in watching this happen in young men's lives, it hasn't worked out well for many of them, and some wives, have different capacities in regards to handling this type of news. I do
Yeah.
think there's a time if you've been wrestling with this, there is probably space to confess that you need help. As for that ongoing like accountability, I think that it gets really messy when you intertwine your wife into that mix, and it might work for some, but from my experience and your anecdotal experience, it seems like, yeah, it might be something to reconsider. I think that just reemphasizes the need for like brotherhood and
Yeah.
guys in your life. Your wife can't necessarily be your mentor, and though she can, like, there can be peer mentoring, but to be your key accountability partner is probably not wise. And the need for guys is just, you can't replace a good group of godly guys around you.
Yes.
Quick question as we head in towards kind of the last section of this is just, what are some of the most common barriers to getting clean for guys?
That's a really good question. We talked about it a little bit earlier, but I think a lot of people think that their situation is different somehow.
Mm,
That, maybe that, oh, yeah, I know other guys have gotten clean, but you guys don't know what I've been through. You don't know what I've done. If only you knew. I think that's probably the biggest thing. And it's an absolute lie of the enemy. The reason the enemy gives us this lie is not to stop us from getting the help, it's to keep us alone.
yeah.
Because like you were saying, like brotherhood and connection, those are the things that really bring about freedom at a fundamental level. So that's by far the biggest one. I think another thing that stops people is they've tried before and it didn't work, so why try
Yeah.
again? And I totally get that sentiment. I felt that way a lot. And there were two things that really helped me. One is I had a vision. Like I said, I knew there were other people that could be impacted by my freedom. And that vision really compelled me on days when it was tough. And I think the second thing is I really started to grow in love with Jesus
Yeah.
and connect the dots and realize every time I'm doing something, it's not that God's disappointed in me. It's not that he's mad at me. It's not that he's going to hold it against me. It's that I've just put a little bit of strain on a relationship that I really, really value. And that anchor point for me was really useful in moments of temptation as well. And there's ripples to those kinds of things. There's the identity shift. There's building the self awareness. There's starting to understand the gospel at a deeper fundamental level. There's things that come with that. But I think for people who are maybe in that camp where they're like, I've already tried something, what's the point? These are the points. There's other
Yeah.
people who are going to be impacted by your freedom, and you have a relationship with God. If you have nobody else on the planet, you just have this podcast and you have God. You have at least one critical relationship there that is worth protecting at all costs. And part of that will include making another effort to get free of porn, even if the last 99 times didn't work out your way.
And I love that about your book, because I think if a guy is desperate for, porn recovery or getting clean of porn addiction, and they open your book for the first time, and maybe this is the first crack at, getting clean of porn, they might just want to like skip to the end where you have the 5 things they have to do, right? Like just go do these things, download these apps. What I found refreshing about your book as I was reading it, I'm like, you don't give guys just like, it's easy. It requires reflecting on some of these things you're reading on. And I thought, I love that Sathiya just didn't give them like, a quick fix. You gave them actually some undoing, some plans. I've seen on your social, you've talked about the desire for like, instead of looking at like even like streaks, but looking towards trends. Guys want to just like, I want to be like, can you unpack that a little bit? And of course I don't want to just like give free resources to all the guys that can check you out online, but can you unpack the trend versus streaks thing? Cause I think that's something that I see in young men all the time.
Yeah. We've been talking about this in our Facebook community quite a bit. Like we have a free group for people who are just looking to get more resources. So I don't mind that. I don't mind people leeching resources. I think that's good. And the reality is, porn addiction is, in my opinion, it's a matter of the internal, right? Yeah. And I think that's like we were saying earlier, a lot of solutions focus on the external. They block you from going on your devices, and they're kind of behavioral modification. What we're really interested in is transformation of the heart. When you're focused on behavioral modification, the way you measure your success is, have I engaged in the behavior or have I not? And this is what gives rise to streak counting. It's, I've gone X number of days without watching. When you are focused on the internal transformation, a real change in the heart, rather than looking at a sudden shift in behavior, what we're actually more interested in is the trend, the general direction that things are going in. Because otherwise what happens is you go 30 days and then you have a relapse, and then you think, oh crap, like I took 2 steps back, or it was all just a facade. None of this was working. What we want to do is we want to try to zoom out and see more of the macro trends. And I posted about this on Instagram the other day, right? We had a guy who his first month in the program, he watched 23 times. And so you think, oh my gosh, like 23 times, well, that's brutal. Like that's almost every single day. But if you zoom out a little bit, in month 2, he only watched 20 times. Very small incremental improvement. We're okay with that because we're not going for a quick fix. We're taking our time. Month 3, he only watched 8 times. So suddenly there's a shift there. And this is typically what happens when guys start to get some momentum going. So month 3 now, we can see the trend is going in the right direction. So if he comes onto a weekly call, and he's like, I had a relapse. Well, we're not super concerned about that. What we're trying to look at is, what's the macro trend here? How does this relapse play into the rest of it? And of course, if things are going in the wrong direction, right, then we have to poke around and say, okay, what are you avoiding, or what are you missing, and whatever. But then to just finish that story, that guy in month 4, he only watched 5 times. So you can kind of see where the trend is going. Like by the time this guy hits, I think he's at month 8 or month 10. He's only had like 1 or 2 relapses in the last couple months now. And it's just obviously a matter of time now before this is out of his life. So it's slow and it's boring. And it's why a lot of people don't do this process, because porn alone conditions us for the instant hit, the immediate gratification. But if you can really like get at the inner parts, and again, if you do it with a community, you do it with some guidance, so you have people who can lead you through this process, it becomes a lot more feasible, and your results are much more likely to last in the long run.
Totally. And what I think about addiction is everybody's story is different, right? And so you do find those people that like throw the cigarettes in the garbage and just never ever do it again.
Definitely.
But other stories are ones that actually said it took me almost a year to kind of taper off this, and there's even programs to help people with tapering and things like that. And so I appreciate your willingness to say, hey, it might not be cold turkey for you. And for
Yeah.
a lot of guys that I've worked with, that when they've tried to go cold turkey and kind of relapse, the pain was so much more because there was this expectation of like, hey, you've got to get this right the first time and the
Yeah.
right time. And so I just want to say I appreciate that, Sathiya, and maybe others might say, hey, aren't they supposed to stop and we're supposed to just, challenge them that way? Of course, that's the goal, but that's not what
Yeah.
guys are doing. And that's not
Yeah.
reality for guys. And so I believe if you're watching today, and Sathiya, I would love for you to encourage anyone, but if you're watching today and maybe you've tried again, reflect on this thing, go follow Sathiya and have a look at like this trend versus streaks idea, because I think it'll transform the way you kind of think about it.
Yeah, I want to add one last thing to what you were just saying, Jordan. I think this is really important because there's also stories of people getting deliverance, right? Where it's
Yeah.
like you get a prayer, and we know God's powerful. We know He can do that in an instant. We see that a very small percentage of people that have actually got set free by deliverance actually experience freedom long term.
Mm.
I don't know the exact numbers, but it's in the minority. For a majority of them, what happens is the impulse and the cravings go away for 2-3 weeks, maybe even a month or two, but they relapse. And the reason this happens typically is because an instant moment, whether you're quitting cold turkey or God does something in your heart, is you still need maturity to sustain that breakthrough.
Yeah.
My pastor says that a breakthrough without a follow through is a moment without momentum.
Oh, come on. Say that
And
again, Sathiya.
yeah, a breakthrough without a follow through is a moment without momentum.
Yeah.
And to get what we need is we don't actually want to seek these one hits, these one moments where everything changes. What we want to do is become mature men of God
Yeah.
who can actually sustain the breakthroughs that God trusts us with long term. And that's why I think going through this process, even though it's long and it's a little bit more boring, it's not as sexy, in the long run, you're going to get way better results. You're going to develop a
Yeah.
maturity and a skill set that's not only going to allow you to sustain the work that God does in your heart, but it's going to allow you to have better relationships. It's going to give you the confidence to pursue your calling. I mean, the benefits are limitless. And so that's what I would encourage your audience with today is especially if you've been trying some other things and you haven't got the freedom that you want, God might be inviting you into a little bit more of a process. And that's a really beautiful thing because on the other side of this, like I said, the benefits are
Yeah.
endless. And there's nothing wrong with continuing to pray those deliverance prayers and getting the help that way as well. I would just be very careful to throw all your eggs in that basket when you have some other ways to go about this that are likely to get you some long-term results.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine that for many guys, undoing like an 8 or 10 year addiction is going to happen in a moment. And so,
Yeah.
if you're listening and that's your case, listen, just have grace for yourself, and know that it's a work in progress. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah.
And I'd just like to for the guys to hear that, because I think so many times guys have tried and they're like, man, this is too hard. But listen, your life is hard. Like life addicted to porn is hard. It's
Yeah.
probably harder, and though it may feel actually more enjoyable, more easier, life addicted to porn is harder and has greater fallout than just kind of actually putting your nose to the grind, finding a community of men, putting in the work of rooting out these issues in your heart and finding true freedom. Whether that takes 8 months or for some of you it might take much shorter than that. Listen, yeah, it's hard, but life addicted to porn is much harder.
Yeah.
And
It's
so,
really well said.
coming to the end of this, I would love for people to give people a quick snapshot as to your recent book, The Last Relapse, the community you have over at Deep Clean, your Facebook group. I would just say, man, as a ministry and Impactus, we just love what Sathiya's doing. And so, tell us where we can find you and what that's all about.
Oh, thanks. That's super kind, man. So one of our mandates has been to get our resources out as affordably as possible. And so if people are just looking for maybe something to get started, The Last Relapse is a great place. We've referenced the book a couple times. It is available on all major platforms, but your audience can actually get a free download of it if they want at thelastrelapsebook.com. That's just my gift to you guys. Like I said, we're also on Instagram. We post content there every day. We also have a daily podcast called Unleash the Man Within. So those are all the channels for people who are just maybe looking to dip their toes. But if you really know that you need help and you can't go another day, or you see where this is going, and it's time to really make a change, then what I would love your audience to do is to book a time with somebody on our team.
Yeah.
We put aside time every single week to speak with guys and to see if it makes sense for them to be part of our program, to see if it's something that's going to match their situation. And the better we understand your situation, the better we can help you, whether it's our program or something else. So that would be my encouragement. And maybe we can put some links in there, Jordan, as well, for people to get that stuff underway. But yeah, booking a call would be the next step if you're serious about getting help.
Cool. Well, Sathiya, thank you so much, man. And we are just so thrilled with what you're doing and praying, man, the best is yet to come for you.
Oh, well, it's my pleasure. And I love what you're doing here, especially with this new podcast, man. Thanks.